After losing an historic trial, a vow to appeal from Johnson & Johnson. Shares in the drug maker are rising. The first verdict of its kind for opioids. And a judge in Oklahoma found that the company played a role, a deliberate role, deceiving in the opioid crisis, one that's ravaged the state of Oklahoma and many others. Now, Oklahoma was asking for over $17 billion. J&J will pay far less, $572 million. And in a perversion of that, their stock actually rose on the news. This story begins in the late 1990s. That's when companies like J&J assured the authorities that patients would not become addicted to their new opioid painkillers. Now, to be fair, these painkillers were extremely effective. They did what they were intended to do, arguably a little too well, because doctors began to prescribe them in massive quantities. Look at the share price of J&J, and much of that share price baked in is the opioid price. J&J's stock is up around 150% over the last 2 decades. The drugs, however, proved highly addictive and wildly open to misuse. The CDC is the Center for Disease Control, the experts on this in the United States. From 1999 to 2017, more than 700,000 people died in places like Oklahoma from overdoses. Think about that, 700,000. And now the judge wrote that J&J engaged in false and misleading marketing of both their drugs and opioids generally. It violated what he called the public nuisance laws. This is an important precedent. We're going to discuss it tonight from a business and obviously medical standpoint. A federal trial will begin accusing the opioid makers of causing the epidemic. J&J shares surged after the verdict came out, and its market cap gained as much as $15 billion, dwarfing the court's order. Other opioid manufacturers, Teva and Endo and International and Mallinckrodt, are dramatically lower. Teva, by the way, had settled in Oklahoma along with Purdue. Abbe Gluck is a professor of both law and medicine at Yale. Professor, good to see you. Thank you. I feel I'm in good hands with a professor of both the disciplines involved here. The significance of this is it's the first. Now to give me the expert opinion of why it's significant.
Right, so it's very significant, you're correct, because it is the first trial verdict in this landscape of more than 2,000 cases. But what's most significant, I think, is that this is the first time that we've seen a company that's not Purdue that's being told by a judge, you're not just a bystander, you were not just caught in the crossfire. The judge in Oklahoma found that the company engaged in affirmatively deceptive marketing practices. It wasn't just negligent, it was intentionally deceptive. Right. I think that's going to set a very important tone going forward.
But his $572 million in quantum sets another tone. It sets, if you like, what he believes. I mean, other judges, maybe, unless there's egregious evidence otherwise, will perhaps use this as a yardstick.
I think it's possible. Every state has been hit in a different way by the opioid crisis, and so the opioid crisis is not the same in Oklahoma as it is in Arizona, for instance. The number, I think, is lower than some people expected. The Attorney General wanted $17 billion, as you said. The market seems to have reacted favorably to the fact that the judgment was a little bit lower. But keep in mind, in Ohio, another state, there are some 1,600 cases pending together that are going to be settled in a global settlement where the allocation of funds is going to be very different.
Okay, what about juries? We haven't heard from a jury yet in this.
It hasn't gone to a jury. So what's interesting about this one is that there was a judge presiding over this trial. Right. A jury is likely to give more money based on the way juries react in our country and based on the extent of personal toll that the crisis has taken on many communities.
Look, the rest of the world watches and says, yep, it's those Americans at it again. First of all, they managed to have an opioid crisis. Now they have to find someone to blame. They have to find somebody to blame in the tort litigant society of the United States. At the end of the day, the insurance companies will pay these damages, shareholders and companies will pay these damages, and drug prices will go up for the rest of us to compensate.
Well, if that's a question, I think in the United States, yes, the way we do move regulation forward and change industry practice is through litigation some of the time. Sometimes we go to the legislative arena. In this particular instance, as the judge in Ohio has said several times, the legislatures have kind of failed us. Congress hasn't done that much on the opioid crisis. State legislatures have tried.
Right.
Various states are reeling, and they need damages. And the court system is the way to get that right now.
Right, but the price will ultimately be paid by the consumer, either through higher insurance premiums from the reinsurers or through higher drug prices. What I'm trying to understand is, this is who actually ultimately pays the bill for all of this?
Well, the companies will be paying the bill, and you're correct that in some instances they may pass things along. The health insurers are not the ones at the moment who are going to be on the hook. They're, in fact, the ones who are trying to get off the hook. Some of the arguments here is that it is the insurance industry. And remember, in the United States, sometimes the state is the insurer. For the poor population, Medicaid is a state-run program. The states don't want to be on the hook for the health care costs of all of these people who have suffered from addiction. So part of what they're going after in these lawsuits is money from the companies that have profited from opioid sales to turn around and pay back the health care costs that they're suffering.